Welcome to the Foreign Press Podcast, an educational program from the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents in the USA in partnership with the Hinrich Foundation, an Asia-based philanthropic organization dedicated to advancing mutually beneficial and sustainable global trade. AFPC USA is solely responsible for the content of this episode. I'm Roseanne Guerin, an assistant editor at the newsletter International Trade Today. Today we're joined by Professor Mariko Watanabe of Gakushuin University in Japan to discuss her recent article for the Hinrich Foundation, China's Industrial Policy is a Recipe for Overcapacity. Professor Watanabe is a leading scholar of applied microeconomics with deep expertise on the Chinese economy, firm behavior, and institutional development. Her research examines how China's policy architecture shapes industrial outcomes, and in this article, she offers a clear-eyed assessment of how catalog-based industrial planning, once a powerful engine of growth, has evolved into a system generating structural distortions at home and mounting frictions abroad. Before we dive in, here's why her analysis matters now. China today produces more than 30% of the world's manufactured goods, and its latest industrial catalog signals an ambition to expand that share even further. But the very scale that once propelled China's rise is now creating systemic overcapacity, deflation across nearly all industrial sectors, and spillover effects that are reshaping global trade, from steel and solar panels to electric vehicles. As Professor Watanabe argues, this is no longer an industry-specific issue, but a structural outcome of China's growth model, one that current international rules are ill-equipped to manage. Professor Watanabe, thank you for joining us to unpack this important and timely analysis.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me.
Great. Let's start with the big picture. China now produces more than 30% of the world's manufactured goods. How did China reach this level of industrial dominance, and what does that scale mean for the global economy?
Okay, I think the first is that, or I want to stress that their size of the manufacturing capacity is a kind of their accomplishment or their effort for last 40 years. But and the most I need to stress is that the state capacity to organize a well-designed development plan, which used to be employed in Japan and Korea, has reached some levels. But it's at the same time that a strategy itself cause a very huge problem both in domestic way and internationally.
Okay. And some Chinese scholars are even advocating for China to reach 45% of global manufacturing capacity. What does that ambition tell us about how scale is being framed inside China as a geopolitical asset or even a strategic weapon?
But until very recently, they are just to implement their own development plan to feed their own nations. But the last 10 years, the U.S. and China international relations got more intensified. That their capacity, they regarded their manufacturing capacity as some kind of geopolitical asset to protect their international from their external pressures.
So at the same time, you argue that this sheer scale has created a serious structural problem, economy-wide overcapacity.
Yeah.
When did you first see signs that overcapacity was becoming systemic rather than sector-specific?
It got clear in autumn of 2024, 2 years ago. It gets more so overall sectors deflationary situation has appeared very even at their official statistics.
And to understand how China arrived at this point, we need to look at the policy mechanism driving these outcomes. That brings us to the catalog system at the heart of your analysis. You identified China's Catalogue of Industrial Guidance, the Chinese government's central planning list that directs resources into priority industries, as the root cause of this overcapacity. For listeners unfamiliar with it, how does this catalog work and why is it so influential?
Yeah, actually, China also built this system gradually. And it started when they declared their socialist market economy in 2092. And the first version of industrial catalog was published in 2004. And afterwards, they are more focusing on to direct their resources on industrial development. And that time, the 2006, the first some kind of overcapacity in the shipbuilding industry has appeared. Since then, they are more, or say, I can say that they are more elaborated, their capacity to organize industry, and they published the industrial guidance afterwards, 2019, 2011, 2019, and the latest version was published in 2024.
How does the catalog shape the behavior of local governments, especially those that may lack technical expertise but still feel compelled to invest heavily in the sectors Beijing designates?
Actually, the catalog is more and more deliver very specific industry to promote or some abolish or some keep stable. For example, the current in that very specific, some kind of materials or some machineries or some environment regulation or something. All this direction was listed in the catalog. So I guess when I talked to the local government officials, they regarded this planning as a very good reference to how to invest or where to invest to promote their own local economies, even though they didn't know nothing about exactly that kind of industry means, these materials, which machineries, they do know nothing about that. But they believe that government gave them a very good reference to invest this way. So all the local government on the nationwide started to think about how to investment from this reference list of industry catalogs.
You describe a dynamic where firms pile into the same industries, EVs, solar panels, steel, leading to massive output even when demand doesn't keep up. What
Yeah.
makes this pattern so persistent?
Persistent. So as I said, for example, if you are building up some EV industries in the outside China, that kind of investment is done by some kind of traditional automakers because they have the good experience, accumulation of knowledge or some capabilities. But in China, these catalogs help them to how to organize into invest into some specific industry that was directed by the government. So some are consulted more. Someone think about import the technology from abroad if they do not have or something. So I think that is partly due to thanks to the Chinese people's very high capacity to do some business. But at the same time, even the entrepreneurs or government officials with no professional knowledge, but they can enter into the industries. So I think the catalog helped them to that kind of some parts of unuseful, unnecessary investment into the industry.
And prices in these sectors keep falling despite rising production. What does that tell us about the underlying distortions created by the catalog system?
Mm. So, for example, in the EV, they currently they have the two very good, excellent countries in China, BYD and Cattle. But these two companies keeps the very high, substantial shares of the production in the world economy. But at the same time, China still keep other 57 companies who produces the EV batteries. Apparently, it looks that overcapacity. They are not. They can produce very ordinary products, but they do not have sufficient capacity to keep up or upgrade the industry. So they do not have enough R&D capacity, but they can still keep on and working on that industry. So I think you can see that the over entry in the industry is one kind of the symptom or no good symptom of the Chinese economy industries.
So that's the machinery behind the expansion. Let's turn to the consequences because the effects aren't just technical, they're showing up across China's economy and in markets around the world. Before framing this as a security issue, you emphasized that it's fundamentally a market failure. How have price signals broken down inside China's industrial system?
Yeah, actually, when the other kind of the market failure refers to several concepts, but what I stress here is that that kind of scale, externality of the scale, particularly the externality due to the industrial linkages. Because of this catalog system, China established a very good industrial-wise input-output relationship. It's very perfect compared to other economy, even Japan or Germany or Korea. Most of country can establish some kind of industrial relation, input of output system, partly, not perfectly, but partly due to the size of Chinese economy and partly due to the government catalog system. The China easily established some kind of very broad and perfect industrial-wise input-output relationship externalities. So that is one thing. It's very good things for economically speaking. It is not. It doesn't sound bad things, but because of this externality, the other economy, even Japan or Korea, may be deprived their room for development, their own industries. So I think that can be some kind of externality issues to is China itself regards that it's not bad things, but for the other economy or competitor or the market for import the Chinese goods has a huge negative impact to break down their own industrial basis. That is called the production production relocation externality in international economies. So I think that is a very negative, that provides huge negative impact to outside world, but China did not regard it. But sorry, yeah.
So, as you said, for other countries, you note that the damage is sudden and structural, cheap Chinese goods flooding in and undercutting domestic industries. Which
Yeah.
sectors or regions have felt this most acutely?
It started in there's an economic analysis. It first started in the shipbuilding industry in 2006, and afterwards 10 years. And currently, even EV industry, the China has started to develop that last 10 years ago, 2016. Then the 13th 5 years plan has started. They listed the EV industry as their promotion target. And afterwards, they did build up some industrial relationship or some clusters. But until very recently, after COVID, Europe did their own industrial bases. And they import some parts from China, but the automobile itself is generated in the EU. But suddenly in 2021, China started to fraudulently export their vehicles itself because the internally over competition generated the flooding as overproduction, and they are almost all whole companies in the industry faced in the negative deficit. So they started to export because of the problem of inside too much competition. They called it involution. They called it in the China.
And for China itself, you describe a paradox. Its industrial strength is suppressing its own purchasing power. How does overproduction contribute to the economic concept of immiserizing growth, or growth that makes a country poorer instead of richer?
Yeah, because of their competitiveness hugely relating on the scale economies due to some kind of externality, due to the industrial input, the relationship. But the more they produce their products, the price is getting cheaper because of the scale economy. So they produce very good things at very cheap prices. Then they export to other countries. They can contribute, or they can export to the worldwide to at the cheap price at very good products, but they can earn very limited because the price of the production is very cheap. So their purchasing power did not arise because they export good things at a very, very low price and import the very luxury prices from outside. So their terms of trade is very negative to them. So, and in addition to this trade relationship, the exchange rate itself is, to some extent, artificially lowered. So for Chinese people, they cannot achieve the appropriate purchasing power despite their production power capability is number one in the world. But their purchasing power is very limited. I think superficially it doesn't produce anything, but for the Chinese people, their purchasing power or their economic welfare is very limited because of this limited terms of trade.
And you make a striking point that both China and its trading partners are losing under the current model. Why does that mutual loss create space for negotiation or a rules-based solution?
Yeah. So at the first, to China, I'd like to suggest that because of the flooding export for a EV or solar panel or something was done at the cost at the basis of their deficit to harsh competition, domestic competition. So at the international rule speaking, or very basic WTO rule principle, you cannot export the products at the deficit based on their deficit situation of your home country. So first, China needs to stop fragile export to the world. And so actually, we do not have the good facility or some good mechanism to protect this kind of some export at the negative deficit. And I dare to say that what Trump administration did, some sort of kind of Trump tariff, is a kind of the response to the overproduction of China. And I partly agree with what the Trump administration do it. But it is not effective or not realistic that only United States government decides some in one side they define their tariff level by one-sidedly. So we need to organize or implement or effective tariff system, so or trade trade maintenance system, so-called safeguard or anti-dumping or counter subsidies. These facility inside WTO should be more elaborate to more improve to face deal with China's overproduction problem. That is one my proposal.
And of course, these economic pressures don't exist in a vacuum. They're now deeply intertwined with
Mm,
geopolitics, especially the dynamics between the United States and China.
mm,
You write that industrial policy has become a geopolitical trap,
mm,
entangling China in a US
mm,
China rivalry that creates a kind of chicken game of
mm, mm,
capacity
mm.
expansion. Why
Yeah.
does Beijing feel it must keep expanding production even when it clearly undermines its own national welfare?
Uh, Although it damages their national welfare, but at the same time, they regard it very unsafe because of the pressure of the United States, Trump administration. And they are externally damaging themselves, so they regard it they regard it the manufacturing capacity can use as some a weapon to protect themselves. So I think we need to ease these kind of tensions beforehand, and the third party countries like Japan or Canada or EU may had better to propose or prepare to the third route to how to deal with these issues by rule-based manner.
And Chinese exports, again, like
Mm,
steel, solar panels, and EVs,
mm.
they're not only flooding the advanced economy markets, but they're also flooding markets in emerging countries like
Yeah,
Vietnam,
yeah.
Indonesia, Mexico, and Turkey.
Mm, mm.
How are these emerging markets experiencing these spillovers differently?
Actually, for example, in Vietnam, they are now becoming one kind of emerging manufacturing countries, and they raise their economic level by exporting to the world. And they also established their own steel industries for their own welfare, economic welfare. But certain flooding exports from China damaged very seriously their domestic steel industry. So they feel they're very dangerous. So the country Vietnam is also already fight to WTO to protect themselves. So the smaller the country is, their damage is bigger. But the smaller, they do not have enough voice to directly to say something against bigger economies like United States or China. So I think in that case, particularly for emerging country, rule-based solution is uh, highly desirable. So I think the some middle power like Japan or EU and Canada, Australia should represent these kind of voices of emerging economies.
And how is the geopolitical trap that you refer to leading to the fragmentation of global supply chains?
Uh-huh. So from the perspectives of China or United States, who has a very huge size, so it's okay for them to protect themselves. But I think it's, as I said, it could become as some kind of chicken game. which was bigger, which is bigger, or something. And I think so. Even China has just pursued their own just person building up their own capacity, but they are now suffering the overproduction capacity. So if the two bigger economies compete each other like that, I think all over the world are suffered from some kind of overproduction situation, and suffered. So we do not have the better economic welfare. So I think we need to elaborate or share the profit from the scale. So if one country or bigger country monopolize the profit from the scale, that we become very disastrous for both parties and the third parties. So I think rule-based system and the WTO itself, or it was originally designed to pass these facilities. So we have better go back to how to improve or so how to make a remedy what the current system has still have. So I think, yeah, so sorry.
Okay. Um, Given this mix of economic strain and geopolitical tension, the natural question is what can actually be done? Let's talk about the kind of reforms both inside China and internationally that might address the root causes. You believe that the core fix isn't simply cutting subsidies, but preventing economies with overwhelming scale from monopolizing the gains from that scale. What would that kind of reform look like in practice?
In practice, okay. So currently, the tension become more and more. So I think a very ordinary negotiation, just improving the WTO system or something, might not be effective. So some actions to coordinate cooperation for some minerals, some critical minerals to share some countries like outside China, because it might be one power to set the negotiation between China and outside. So I think that kind of direction, movement into this direction might be unavoidable at these stages. But it's also very costly. So I think in the final step, we have to we have to see how to reform the WTO system, particularly focusing on how to protect the invasion due to some damage due to the scale. Specifically speaking, the current safeguard, anti-dumping, and countervailing duties, these system should be modified to effectively protect from the flooding exports from China due to their too fierce domestic competition.
Now, inside China, you say the country needs to rebalance towards domestic consumption, more household security, less investment-driven production. What are the political and structural barriers to that shift?
First, I think from the perspective from Beijing, the first pressure is, as I said, the external pressure from the United States or other countries. But at the same time, their philosophy of Communist Party is more, they are not originally to passing the welfare of the people, but they're protecting their own state. The state is more heavier than the nation's welfare. I think, but the Chinese government need to change their philosophy to how to protect their state from outside pressure, but to pursue the welfare of their nations. I think, but traditionally speaking, the Communist Party are not accustomed to do things like that, and no political pressure due to some election or something. But economically speaking, I think now the time for the government to change their philosophy. But it's really, very hard by their nature or political stance.
And internationally, you argue that addressing overcapacity will require multilateral cooperation and
Mm,
a retooled world organization, as
mm,
you've already discussed with
mm,
things such as modifying the countervailing duties. But
mm.
what other specific reforms would make the WTO more effective in this area?
In this area, okay. So actually, these kind of economic tensions we Japan experienced in 1980s. At that time, most of the Japanese economists are seriously working on issues how to solve the conflict between United States and Japan at that time. And according to their research, the serious root of the issue is economy scale, as I discussed today. And they gave a solution that to one of this kind of counter tariff or some anti-dumping safeguard, this type of production, they stress that to build up some the system to share the profit from the scale, that they do not the system do not let one country monopolize the power, monopolize the profit from the scale. So if one country monopolize the profit from the scale economy, that easily turned into some political power or some abuse of the power may happen. So the better way is to share globally the profit of the scale. And at that time, what Japanese government proposed is to make the tariff of some information technology goes to zero. So that proposal became the Agreement of Information Technology, ITA, under the WTO. And because of that, all the trade is zero tariff for the information technology goods now. So because of that, for example, if the China produced the iPhone designed by United States people and processed in Malaysia and Vietnam. So the scale economy regarding to the iPhone is globally shared between Japan, United States, China, Malaysia, or Vietnam. So in this area, we do not experience any overproduction problem or any economic conflict. So as referring to this, our experiments, so I think we have better to establish more better way to prevent the some particular country monopolize like their production power inside themselves. So in case of China, the problem is that they are geographically so huge and population-wise they are big. So the state is the government, the country easily monopolize their capacity. So that is so they regard it currently they regard it where this power will become some geopolitical assets. But this idea is very, very dangerous for the economy. So we need to let China understand this kind of abuse of the power scale is very dangerous for both them and we. So, but so how to? So I think this become very. We are now in the very bad equilibrium. So I don't know what. So we need to think about the procedure, how to persuade them to open up their countries. So, but we need to. The final target is to that kind of zero tolerance or some that's good system open economy. But at this time it gets more political. But so first, the second best way to resolve this problem is that we, other than China economy, also has the power to of the some scale. So that kind of CPTPP and EU or these type of FTA are coordinated each other and building up some and pursue some scale economy within non-China, non-United States economy as integrated. So in that case, the third power is big enough and big enough to negotiate with China and the United States. So I think that this is a second best, but a more pragmatic way of thinking at these stages.
That also raises the question of how any kind of global reforms affect countries that aren't major powers but still feel the impact of overcapacity.
Mm,
What kind of remedies do middle income countries need to avoid being squeezed
mm,
between two giant economies?
mm. It's really hard to say and not very good instant answer. But I think first, even at these stages, a WTO is still function to some extent. So for the most of the emerging economy, the files against at the WTO is the first option to do that and to let the China or United States sit in some kind of negotiation, particularly for China. I don't talk about United States, but if particularly talk about China, they announce themselves as some protector of free trade rule systems. So so that means they do. Uh, uh, China also respect to the decision of the WTO system or MPIAs. I think so. For the relatively larger middle powers like EU or Japan or Canada, will should had better to protect the more smaller countries to protect their right or some their decision to fire against the WTO system, and I think so, and build up some kind of political decision or commitment to these issues.
And before we end,
Mm.
are there any closing thoughts you have on this topic that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Okay, so currently everything is messy, mess up now, but I think very very chaotic situation may not last for for long terms, and so I feel that as a Japanese, this as a who comes from the third party economy, not China, not the United States. I think there's some kind of rule or some kind of globalization is a very important assets for the third party countries. So I think although it looks very stupid to talk about rules-based economy at this very chaotic situation, but I think that anyway we cannot. I think this way is a more better option, not worse option, than to messing up and just to fight against tiger and elephant. So I think we want to stress that third countries should unite and build up our own scale to keep up our voice to be heard.
Professor Watanabe, thank you for sharing your insights into China's catalog-based industrial
Mm.
policy and the broader implications of systemic overcapacity for the global economy. Your analysis brings much-needed clarity to a complex and fast-moving issue. And to our audience, thanks for listening. I'm Roseanne Guerin, and this has been the Foreign Press Podcast, brought to you by the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents in the USA in partnership with the Hinrich Foundation. AFPC USA is solely responsible for the content of this episode.